All right. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. So yes, the little flyers we're giving out because we're starting this very exciting project of being able to sponsor Timeless Torah. Could be in memory of someone, Leilui Nishmat, or it could be in celebration of a special event for a family. It will be included both on the. We'll introduce the share with the person it's dedicated to, or the event is dedicated to, and it will go in the advertising literature in advance, and also, in terms of the printed Dvar Torah that comes out as a result. So it's a wonderful opportunity to help others learn Torah and support the shul at the same time. So the title of the share is The Journey of Exile and Return. The Journey of Exile and Return, Parshas Vayeitzei. It occurred to me that there is a line, and this suddenly struck me, the line, and sometimes you have this, where we have a line in our tefillah that we say, is only said a few times a year, it's said by the Chazan, but it's the very first line on the sheet. When the Chazan says the Hineni prayer, which is the prayer before the Musaf Amida on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, he says, Heyeh no matzliach darki asher ani or anochi holeich. Please make successful the path upon which I tread. La'amoy, to stand and lavakesh rachamim olai v'al sholchai, and to seek and express and receive mercy for myself and for those who have sent me for this task. And the reason why this is so powerful is because it is mirrored and it is a paraphrase of the words that Yaakov says. If you look at chapter 28, verse 20, Perek Chav Ches Pasuk Chaf, it says, Vayidar Yaakov neder leimor. That Yaakov makes a vow. This is after the vision of the ladder. Im yeh Elokim imodi, if Hashem will be with me, Ushmorani, and protect me, Baderech hazeh asher anochi holech. That will protect me. He will protect me on the path upon which I go, which I travel. And he gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear. When we use a paraphrase and when we use a phrase from Tanakh in our tefillot, it is not by chance, it is not just because it's a nice phrase. It's because there's a direct link, there's a meaning, there's a powerful symbolism of the moment. What is the power of this moment for Yaakov? The power is the fact that he knows he is about to embark on something which is completely outside his comfort zone, where he wishes to be. Yaakov is a Yoshev Ohalim. Yaakov wishes to dwell in the tent. He doesn't want to be someone who is outgoing in that sense. We expressed and explained last week the difference between Yaakov and Esav, the different characters, and the journey that Yaakov has to go on in terms of receiving the blessings and everything else, and we're familiar with this. He is forced to do something very, very different now. And the journey that he goes on in many ways parallels the Jewish journey, because the journey, it is a journey in exile of many, many years, and an eventual hope and a longing for return. The question that faces us at this point in the parasha is that he's just had a direct promise from Hashem. If you turn back a few psukim, so you look at pasuk Tet Vav 15. Hashem says that you will be blessed, etc., and you will inherit this land. V'hinei anochi emoch, I will be with you. Ushmartichon, I will guard you, I will protect you. B'chol asher telech, wherever you go. V'ashiva sicha lo hadamah hazeh, I will return you to this land. Ki lo ya'azovcha, I will not forsake you. Ad Hashem osisi es asher dibarti loch, until I have done and I have everything that I have spoken about you. This is a promise. It is a vision that he receives. This is a prophetic vision. It is not a mere dream. It's a prophetic vision. Yaakov wakes up and he says, I never realized how holy this place is. It is Mount Moriah, it's Har Moriah, Zeshar HaShamayim, this is the gate of heaven. He gets up, he takes the stone, and then he says, he makes this vow, if Hashem will be with me and protect me, then he says, and if I return in peace, then I will establish this stone as a matzeva, a monument in that way, or the stone that is a monument will become a Beit Elokim, the house of God. So the question is, he's just had the promise, why does he need to make the vow? What is it that he's trying to achieve through this vow? What does he see and what does he face that he feels it necessary to make a vow? This promise, this vow that I'm making, he says, that and it's a prayer. Please protect me. Why the need for the vow? I wanted to introduce it with a powerful moment in history, which is one of the earliest artifacts ever discovered in the land of Israel. These are known as the Lachish letters. This is number 2 on the sheet. If you look at the footnote at the bottom, the Lachish letters are a series of letters written in carbon ink, containing ancient Israelite inscriptions in ancient Hebrew. That means the ancient Hebrew script on clay ostraka. These letters were discovered at the excavations at Lachish, which you can go to today and you can see those excavations. They were written probably shortly before Lachish fell to the Babylonian army of King Nebuchadnezzar in 588 or thereabouts BCE during the reign of Zedekiah, king of Yehuda. So it is a real reach back into some of the earliest written records that we have of the ancestors of our people. It's back to the time of the destruction of the first temple, the first Beit HaMikdash. And that, the letters themselves can seem to be a dialogue, perhaps between a ruling authority in the city and one of his subordinates. They are fragmentary, so there are different letters, different pieces of pottery containing fragmentary words. This particular letter, which is known as letter 4, it seems to be a message sent perhaps from someone outside the city of Lachish. And he says, the person who writes the letter says, he would know, if in his turning he had inspected, he would know that for the signal stations of Lachish, we are watching, according to all the signs which my Lord gives, because we do not see the signals of Azekah or Azekah. They're a very cryptic inscription, and like many fragmentary inscriptions, we're not entirely sure what it refers to, but one theory is the following. If you look in the book of Yirmiyahu, which is the next source, it says that the two remaining fortified cities that were not destroyed by the invading Babylonian army are Lachish and Azekah. V'chel melech Bavel nilchamim al Yerushalayim, the army of the king of Babylon waged war against Jerusalem, al kol arei Yehuda, all of the cities of Judah, Hanosaros, that were remaining, and Lachish ve'el Azekah, to Lachish and Azekah. These are the two names, the place, the location was in Lachish. The two names mentioned in this inscription are Lachish and Azekah. Ki yenei nisharu ba'arei Yehuda arei mivtzar. For these were the fortified cities that remained of the cities of Judah. So now you have to put yourself in the mind of the letter writer. The cities of Judah are being destroyed by the invading Babylonian army. They are getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. There are only two cities remaining, Lachish and Azekah. And the letter writer says, I can no longer see the signals of Azekah. I can no longer see the signs that that city makes. In other words, it could be that that city too has fallen. And if that's the case, they write to Lachish saying, you're the remaining stand. You are the last holdout before the Babylonian army. And therefore, it is an incredibly powerful moment in history. It is a moment before exile. What are Jewish people doing in the moment before exile, when everything seems dark, when it is night? They are looking for a signal. They're looking for a sign. They're looking for something that says, better times will come. And that's what the really letter writer is saying. They're looking for a sign. I'm looking for a sign. You're the only ones who seem to be remaining. They're saying, show a signal, show a sign that there is still life, that there is still hope, there is still potential in the future. Yaakov's journey parallels our journey. It parallels our journey into exile. This is one example. This is an ancient example. Perhaps the first exile, the Babylonian exile. And of course, we know that there have been many subsequent exiles. What is it that Yaakov is trying? What is he afraid of? Hashem has promised and said, I will look after you. Look at what the Sforno says. Beautiful Sforno, which you have to understand. And it's like a lot of commentaries of the early commentators, a lot of their words, you read them and then you need to reread them. Because when you reread them, you see a much deeper meaning. Very brief comment. The Sforno says as follows, right? 15th century approximately. He says, which means basically enemies and people who, monea is someone who withholds, someone who's preventing me do things. The things that prevent me being what I need to be towards in my own mind, the things that make me be like ma'avir on my own da'at, my own knowledge, my own intellect, that I'm unable to think clearly, va'aldas kono, and the things that prevent me understanding and fulfilling the will of my Creator, right? The one who is koneh shamayim va'aretz, the one who owns the heavens and the earth, Hashem. Kamo sha'omru Chazal, as Chazal, the sages said, this is a quote from a Gemara in Eruvin, Gimel ma'avirin es ha'adam al da'atu v'aldas kono. There are three things that cause a person to transgress his own intellect, his own mind. In other words, to be out of mind in a sense that we are unable to focus on what we need to do and achieve in life, and what we are required to do, what Hashem requires of us. What are those three things? Number one, goyim. Number one, being attacked by those who wish to do us harm. In this sense, it's a reference to the nations of the world. That's what it means. And it means those who seem to harm us. V'ruach ra. The second thing is ruach ra. What is a ruach ra? Literally means an evil spirit. But Rashi on the Gemara in Eruvin says, nichnas bo shade, some sort of demon enters the person, v'nitra daito, which means the person loses their mind. Their mind is not clear. Yeah, something happens that causes a person to become not of sound mind, and it can be understood that way. If the first element is the oppression that we face, he's sitting out here. The three key threats and pressures we face in exile specifically. Number one is the oppression from the nations of the world, those who seek to do us harm, what we call nowadays anti-Semitism. The second one is ruach ra, this sense of, you could call it internal pain, internal depression, a sense of this, if the world is closing in against us, that the internal suffering that we face. That's the ruach ra. And finally he says, v'dikduke anius. Dikduke anius is poverty. That means the details of poverty, the fact that we is often and have often been in a situation in exile where the simple requirements to live, to make ends meet, causes us just to do the wrong thing. We'd love to do the right thing, but often we suffer and we are unable to as a result. He carries on and he says, Shmarani, to protect me from those who seek to do me harm, those who rise up against me. And the last line, V'nosan li lechem le'echol, he prays to Hashem, give me bread to eat, shele'achrecheni ho'anius la'avar al dati v'das koni. So that poverty itself, being impoverished, should not cause me to transgress, again that phrase, my own mind and the mind of Hashem. This Seforno, I think, is a very powerful, very, very powerful piece because it explains and answers the question. What was our question? Why is Yaakov afraid? He has had a prophetic vision. God has said, I will look after you. Hashem says, I know you're afraid, you will be fine. What is he afraid of? So according to the Seforno, I think we can say as follows. Yaakov's prayer is he prays to Hashem, don't allow me to fall victim to circumstances beyond my control. And that's our fear in exile. That our fear in exile, our fear when we are in galut, and exile of course can mean the physical exile when we are exiled from the land of Israel, but it's also a spiritual exile. When we're not in the place and circumstances that we feel best able to keep our faith in the right way and in the best way. Our fear is, and our prayer to Hashem is, let not those circumstances that are beyond my control rule my life. And so often, for our people, these are the three factors that we have faced that have threatened us. They have been the sense of oppression from those who wish to harm us, who don't understand us and afflict us and oppress us. That's the first one. And the second two is the internal sense of my internal strife and my inability to lift myself up, and external factors, just the circumstances of making ends meet. And as we'll see, we can develop these three themes as key elements in what actually transpires in Yaakov's journey. And that's what we're going to try and do, and finish with the eventual return to the land of Israel at the end of the parsha. So Yaakov makes his journey. And he begins, and we're familiar with the story. We're going to try and pick up on some elements that perhaps are slightly less familiar. Let's look at the line when he attacks and he turns round to Lavan and says, why did you deceive me? Chapter 29, verse 25. Perek Chavtes, Pasuk Chavhei. So it says, he suddenly realizes it was in the evening, and he realizes, and he takes Leah, but he only realizes in the morning that in fact it is Leah. So verse 25, let's pick it up from there. Vayiva boker, and it was in the morning. Have you got that? V'hinei hi Leah, and it was Leah. Vayomer Lavan, he said to Lavan, Mazos osisa li, what is this you have done to me? Halo v'Rachel avadati moch. I worked for Rachel. That was the deal. We had a deal. V'lama rimisoni. Why have you deceived me? What is it? Why have you deceived me? So you feel the pain in Yaakov's voice, saying, we had an agreement and you deceived me. And Lavan answers and says that we don't do this in our way. We know, I didn't tell you all the details. Had you read the small print? He says, how you didn't, he didn't tell you the deed, you didn't ask me, I didn't say, we didn't know, etc., etc. He goes down his way, the way of deceit. What is the real issue? What is the real deceit that he feels? What is the damage that he feels Lavan has done by this act? And we're going to show you an amazing Orach Chaim. And remember, Orach Chaim is 17th, early 18th century. Yeah? Just remember it's 18th century we read this. And you'll see why. Mazos osisa v'gomer. What is this that you have done? What is this that you have done? Tzarich ladas, he says. Number 5 on the sheet. Yeah? What do you have to know? We have to understand. Kavanoso, his intent. B'koivelonos, with his complaint, mazot. Mazos, what is this? V'im al haramos, if he was talking about the deceit, harihu omer v'loma rimisoni. He says, why have you deceived me? That's a separate statement. Zeyagid, ki levado ramos kodem le'od dovar maguna. There was something bad going on apart from the deceit. Read the line carefully. Always have to do that, right? Read the pasuk. What does it say? He doesn't just say, why have you deceived me? He says, mazos osisoli. What have you done? What is this you have done to me? Hello, I worked for Rachel. Why have you deceived me? There's two separate things here. He's got two separate issues. What have you done to me and why have you deceived me? He says Yaakov, however, the truth is like this. Yaakov yikmal al shnei devarim. There are two things that Yaakov complains about. The first is the act. The act of giving him Leah in place of Rachel. And the second one is that he did it in a deceitful way. If he hadn't done this actual deceit, he wouldn't be so particular. And he would have gone, the fact that it was, because he did it in a way, a manner of deceit, that was what made it so bad. That was what made it so bad. So he says, "V'tamak podoso." The reason why he was so particular, letzad ma sheyotze lemizeh b'to'uso. What really upset him was the fact that he, the result of the act, the result of the mistake. That's what really upset him. So the idea is, if he had not done it through deceit, he had simply switched them without being deceitful about it. So he would have said, this would have been a painful thing. This is wicked, etc., etc. But the result of doing it in a deceitful way has terrible consequences. Number one, it affects him personally, spiritually. He intended to marry one lady, one woman, and he marries someone else. Think what damage that does to him as an individual, as a caring person, as a person who wants to build a family and a home. The damage. The Yotzim is Dvarim Bolti Agunim. He doesn't go into details, but we can imagine what was wrong with it. That he went and it causes things which it's a terrible emotional distress for him personally. Righteous people, he says, are particularly careful about things that affect their spirituality. There is no greater, we could say, detriment and damage to a sense of personal spirituality than thinking you're with someone and you're actually with someone else. I mean, you can't,
Yaakov deceived Esau.
So this is a different question, which we did last week, in terms of Yaakov's action, and we understand how and why it is he acts in that way. But that is in terms of the blessings, and we explained last week how that basically was because he was sold and bought the right to the firstborn. Good question, absolutely fantastic question. But what the Orach Chaim is focusing on here is that the fact that it was a deceitful act, in the sense that the consequences that it had for him personally, that was what really upset him, the damage it did to him spiritually. And then he says something amazing. He says another approach. Another possibility why it says, why have you deceived me? Because of the damage it did to Leah. Think about it. The woman he had married, she ended up being married in a deceitful way. And this would distance the whole relationship. And because he'd already decided, I'm not going to leave this woman now. Of course she's going to be my wife forever. How can I do that? I'm going to reject her. You understand? That's why he was so particular. He was so particular because think of the damage that he had done to his own daughter. So that's why I said to you, this is writing this in the 18th century. He's pointing out that there are two separate things here. There's the act of switching them. And if Lavan had turned up on the wedding day, and it wasn't, and he said, okay, actually we made a mistake, but here's Leah. You're going to have to marry Leah. He'd then have a decision to make. What do I do? Do I marry her? Do I not marry her? If that element of the deceit, but he hid the fact that it was Leah. She was concealed. She couldn't see who it was, etc. And it turns out that it's Leah. And that has two devastating consequences for him.
Is
One second. Two devastating consequences for him. Number one, it affects him. Obviously, it damages his spirituality very, tremendously. And secondly, is the damage it does to Leah. The fact that she now had to have gone through this process and the whole beginning of their marriage, because he knows he's going to stay married to her for sure as a result. Well, she's going to have to live with this the rest of her life. And how awful and horrific is that? And therefore the point, I will come back, and therefore the point is like this. According to this understanding of the Orach Chaim, what Yaakov is pointing out here, and what Yaakov is saying, why did you deceive me, is that he's saying that the most insidious forms and threats that we face sometimes is the type which undermine our own values, that undermine the way we wish to live, the spiritual level upon which, the plane we wish to live on. That is the most painful form of anti-Semitism of all. There's a famous quote of Golda Meir. You know this quote of Golda Meir? It's a well-known quote. She writes it in her work, A Land of Our Own. She says, when peace comes, we will perhaps, you're familiar with this, we will perhaps in time be able to forgive the Arabs for killing our sons. But it will be harder for us to forgive them for having forced us to kill their sons. It's a very powerful quote. The idea and what we have faced through oppression, the most painful oppression we face, is when we are forced to undermine our own values. And that is what Lavan does here. And that is the pain of Lama Rimi Sani. Why have you deceived me? You can cause me problems. You can undermine me. You can make me work for years and years. And then you can give me the wrong woman. But to pretend that it was someone else, so that my own spirituality was undermined, my own home, the spiritual home I wish to build, and the person, her. How could you do that to her? You could damage her in this way. And that is, I think, the first representation of the threat that we face in a broader sense in exile, that sense of oppression from those external to us. Right, Brian, you had a question. It's okay? All right. So we're going to go on to the second one. What is the second source, the Ramban? Now, there's a very painful dialogue that goes on, which needs so much, it's so difficult to understand, and there's so many different ways to understand it, and perhaps we still, even with that, we still struggle. What is the dialogue between Rachel and Yaakov, when Rachel is not able to have children, yeah? Let's look at it inside. It says like this. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, okay, we got
16.
Yeah, no, it's actually going to go a bit further than that, yeah. So Leah has 4 children, Rachel is unable to have children, right? Beginning of chapter 30, yeah? Paraglam Apostle. Vatera Rachel. And Rachel saw Kilo Yolda Yaakov, that she had not given birth, she had not born a child to Yaakov. And Rachel is jealous of her sister. And she says to Yaakov, Hovo livonim, give me children. If not, she says, I'm dead. Vayichraf Yaakov barachal, and Yaakov was angry with Rachel. Vayom, and he said, Asachas Elokim anochi, am I in place of God? Hashem ona mimech privoten, that is withheld from you, child. When she says, etc., and then she goes on to give her maidservant, and the maidservant has a child for Yaakov, and eventually, of course, we know she does have a child. What is going on in that dialogue? That dialogue between Yaakov and Rachel? It seems almost impossible to understand. Let's learn and try and study how the Ramban approaches it. The Ramban, one of our most important commentators, says as follows. This is source number 6. Omru HaMafarshim, the commentaries explain, Shetispalel olai. When she says, give me children, what does she mean? She means daven for me, pray for me. V'mayin, if not, Mesa anochi, she says. It's as if I'm not alive anymore. This is Rashi. Shemisha ein lo bonim choshev kameis. That someone who does not have children, it's as if they are deceased. V'hu midrash Rabbeinu. V'ani tamea. The Ramban says, I'm astonished. Im kein loma chora apoy. If so, loma chora apoy. Why was he angry? V'loma omar hasachas elokim anochi. Why does he say, am I in place of God? Right? Why does he say that? V'shomei al tzadikim Hashem. Hashem hears the prayer of the righteous. So if Rashi is correct, this is the Ramban's question on Rashi, that she's asking for him to daven for her, to pray for her, why is he angry? That's a reasonable request. Tzadikim, that's what they do. Righteous people, they pray to God. They pray to God. Yeah, exactly. They pray to Hashem. That should be his response.
Father did it.
And that which Abba said, Lo hoya lo bonim, ani yesh li bonim. Because Rashi goes on to explain that I'm different to my father. Yaakov was saying I'm different. Why? Because my father didn't have children, right? That's why he prayed. But he says, I have children, Yaakov was saying. Who doesn't have children here? Only you, Rachel. Not from me. So the Ramban says, "V'chi tzadikim einon nispalim b'dacherim." The righteous people not daven for others. Leave aside the relationship, the husband and wife. It's just we can't understand the dialogue. You understand what is going on? Rashi understands the dialogue is, Rachel says, please pray for me to have children. Yaakov's response is, for some reason he's angry, which we don't understand. Why should he be upset at that request? It's a completely reasonable request. And his answer is, I am different to my father. And it's true that my father davened that his wife should have a child, but that's because he also needed a child. But I have children, so why should I daven for you? Now, that's also incredibly difficult to understand. Well, righteous people pray for others, right? Why should he not pray for Rachel? And he brings examples. Eliyahu, Elisha, he says, of course, Eliyahu and Elisha, even they daven for even for non-Jewish women. Of course, it would be davening. Venira, he says, so the first thing he says is you should understand that it's as a result of this that our sages, they found it fitting to understand, as it says in the Medrash Rabbah, that Hashem's response to Yaakov is a critical one. Hashem said to him, Kach onin es hameikos, is this how you respond to those who are oppressed? And as the sages say, that was in fact a criticism of Yaakov for doing this. You will see that your sons will have to stand in front of her son. In other words, Yosef will be on a higher pedestal than them as a result of your actions. But on the way of the simple understanding, he says, Rachel said to Yaakov, so he's going to give a different explanation now. He's going to say like this, Rachel said to Yaakov, give me children. And her intention was that he should pray for her. That she should pray that she should have children. And if not, she should end her life. There should be no more. She should not carry on living. Dibra shelo kahogin b'kinosa. She, in that sense, she asked incorrectly with her desperate desire. She thought that through his love for her, Yaakov would fast and wear sackcloth and ashes and pray until she would have children so that she would not die from the pain of being childless. Yaakov was angry. Why was he angry with this request? Because he said, the righteous people, they may daven, tzaddikim daven, but they don't have the ability to all, sometimes the answer is not the answer. There's always an answer, but it's not necessarily the answer they were hoping for. So he doesn't have the ability to change things. So because she spoke in that way that was so desperate, and she said, Father, you don't do this, I'm going to die. That was what upset him. He says, only Hashem can change the scope, can change the natural course of events, the natural course of history. Only Hashem can make someone who is unable to bear children. According to our sages, we understand that all of the three mothers of Sarah, Rivka, and Rachel were unable naturally to have children. And it was a miracle they were able to bear children. And that was his response. It is not that he's not concerned about the fact, and he's not and the reason why he says that it was withheld from her and not from him. This was in order to afflict her in this way, to understand. She needed to understand, according to the way Yaakov saw it, that this was an incorrect way of asking. She was asking in the sense that you, Yaakov, can change the course of history. It's up to you. You are someone who can pray and change everything. And Yaakov's response was, it's in Hashem's hands. It's not in my hands. It's in Hashem's hands. And that's what he wanted to drive home to her, even though it was incredibly powerful and difficult language to understand. Now, in other words, according to the Ramban, what is going on here is an immensely painful dialogue, but it's an approach and understanding as to the power of prayer. Prayer is effective, but Yaakov is teaching her, pray to Hashem. Don't say that it's me, that I can change everything, because I'm not able to do so. That essentially, and he was shocking her by doing that. Now, what is Rachel's response? The righteous woman, means Rachel, when she saw that she wasn't able to rely on the prayer of Yaakov, she continued, she turned inward, she turned into herself, and she prayed to the one who could hear her prayer. V'zeu vayishma eleha Elokim. And that is what it means when it says later on, when she has children afterwards, it says, look at chapter Lamed, chapter 30, Pasuk Chav Beis, verse 22. Vayizkar Elokim es Rachel. What does it say? Hashem remembers Rachel. Vayishma eleha Elokim. What does that mean?
He listens
To her, not to him.
To her.
Not Yaakov.
Not to her.
Vayiftach es rachma, and he opens her womb. And this is something which is an amazingly powerful insight. What the Ramban has taken us on, how the Ramban has encouraged us to understand the dialogue, is a question of faith and hope and trust when it seems there's a brick wall. There is nowhere to go. Rachel has nowhere to go. She is at the end. And she turns around to her husband and she says, this is it. This is it. I can't face life anymore. Finished. I can't face it. She's watched her sister have all these children and she is in such deep emotional pain. Yaakov's response, which is a complex response, is you have to dig within yourself and you have to have hope in Hashem. That's essentially what his response is. And the way he says that to her is by saying, don't depend on me. Don't think that it's me, that I can't change the way of Hashem. Of course he can daven, but ultimately it's up to Hashem. And that is what makes her go deep within herself. And he says, he goes on to say, just to summarize with the last bit, he says that Yaakov, it could be, he says perhaps that Yaakov, it's impossible to understand that he didn't daven for her. Of course he would have davened for her, but he wasn't, perhaps his prayer wasn't accepted. And now Rachel was coming to complain and say, why is it that it didn't work? And he answered and said, I did pray for you, but it's in the hand of Hashem. That's how it is. What I think we see from this Ramban, it's complicated, is that this, I said that the second factor that's brought out by the Seforno is Ruach Ra, that sense of deep personal pain and an inability to achieve or inability to grow or become what we spiritually hope to become when in a sense of exile, when in a place of galut, a place of exile, right? This plays out in all sorts of different ways. And although you could say this element of it is not connected to the exile element, it is all contained within the story of Yaakov and his existence, his journey outside, his journey through the land of Haran, where he goes to, that sense of pain of exile. And what we see from here is that the experience of personal pain and the sense of being trapped with nowhere to go is a ramification of being in exile. Yaakov encourages Rachel to always maintain that sense of hope and trust. That's what's going on in that dialogue. I want to show you the third example. If you turn over to the next page, Rav Moshe Feinstein has a comment where he tries to understand another complex piece. Let's look at the Pesukim inside. Chapter 31, verse 14. Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud Dalet. 31, sorry. Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud Dalet. So this is the moment when Yaakov says, I'm going to go home. Right? It's time to go home. What does he see? He sees that Inenu Elov Kitmol Shilshem, Lavan is not behaving exactly the same way. And what does he say? What does he say? He says, and they have the whole issue with the sheep and the flocks. And then he comes to his wife and his children. And what does he say? He says that Hashem appeared to me, that the angel of God has appeared to me and says that you need to go back. Pasuk Yudalet. Vatan Rachel v'Leah respond. They answer. Vatomarnu lo. They say to him, Ha'od lonu chelek v'nachala b'veis avinu. Do we have a portion anymore in our father's house? Halo nochrios nechshavnu lo. We're considered like strangers. Kimo charanu, because he has sold us. V'yochol gam ocholes kaspeinu, and he's consumed all our money anyway. Whatever we owned, it is nothing. It is all whatever we've been able to recover. That's all it is. Whatever Hashem says, you shall do. Rav Moshe Feinstein, in his commentary on this, he has a very basic question. He says, I don't understand their response. What does Yaakov say? Yaakov says, Hashem appeared to me, an angel of God came to me and said, it's time to go home. They should have said, whatever Hashem says, we'll do. Okay, let's go. Right? Why do they say that, well, seems like a good plan anyway to listen to what Hashem says, because we've got no purpose in being here anymore. Because we're really considered strangers to our father anyway. There's no more inheritance left for us, so we might as well go back. That's a very strange response. They've been living with Yaakov's ambit of spirituality, sense of faith and emunah. When Yaakov says, we had a vision, prophetic vision, let's go back, they should say yes. They don't say that. They say there's no point staying anyway, so we might as well go back. What's going on? So he says like this. He says, I understand why Yaakov said to ask them the question, etc. so it shouldn't be difficult to leave the place that they have become accustomed to be in. That's why he had to encourage them. But it's very strange why they responded in this way. About 7 lines up from the right-hand column, he says, "V'tzorech lema," you have to say that the reason was shelo lehiskader b'hamitzvah. It means to say that the idea was, what I think he's trying to say is as follows. There were two approaches to how they could have responded and understood the challenge they were facing and the requirement to go back. There was now a command to go back. They could have said, it is difficult to fulfill this, it is hard to do this mitzvah, or they could have said, this is straightforward, this is easy, because this is Hashem's will. And the message they chose to give over and impart to future generations was, Shebechol mitzvah leiko nisyonos gedolim, that with every mitzvah, there isn't really a real test, there isn't really. Shelacheni akal l'kayim. It is easy to do. There is never a loss from doing any mitzvah of the Torah. At the end of the day, a person's parnasa, his needs are decided from the beginning of the year, from Rosh Hashanah, and Hashem will give us whatever we need. And doing things in a way that is against the will of Hashem will never get us to the right place anyway. The nimtza, second last line, she'ein bozeh shum nisayon. At the end of the day, there wasn't really a test. Their response of saying, well, we don't really have anything to gain here any longer anyway, was a lesson to future generations. When you're faced with a challenge, realize that ultimately, and the challenge is based on the right thing to do is how Hashem has commanded me, as Hashem, the mitzvah that Hashem has given me. The right way to approach it, and the best way to approach it, is not by saying this is really hard, this is really difficult, but by saying it is a joy to fulfill Hashem's command. And he says, look at the last line, this is an educational piece. It's an educational point to transmit to the next generation that it is straightforward and easy to fulfill the word of Hashem. And now he jumps into 20th century America. Those who glorify themselves, America, and they say, we've been in America 50 years and we didn't transgress Shabbat. They can't educate their children. In other words, what he means is that people were saying, it was really, really hard, but we still managed to do it. Even though we're finding it really hard to do. But maybe the next generation, maybe the next generation won't be able to stand against that difficult test. And therefore, he says that with the person's attempted education, on the contrary, he's actually made it difficult for the next generation. Because they will say, we can't do it. It was really hard for our father or our mother. It was really hard. And we can't do that. We're not capable of doing that. And it will be that they won't be able to keep Shabbat. The last 5 lines of someone who knows that it's really not a test, it's really not so difficult because he has faith that Hashem will provide. This is talking about a situation in America as it was in the early 20th century where they would lose their jobs every week because they had to work on Saturday. And if they didn't work on Saturday, they would lose their jobs. And Rav Moshe says this in other places as well. He used to say there were 2 types of people who would come home on a Friday afternoon. Both of them had lost their jobs because of Shabbat. 2 groups of people. Some people would come home on Friday afternoon and would say, this is really awful, this is so difficult, I can't believe it, I can't do it, I can't cope. And they would sit down and they would keep Shabbat. They lost their job. Incredible Mesirat Nefesh, self-sacrifice. That was one type of person. And then he says there was another type of person who would come home and they would sit down on the Friday night table and they would say, and they would smile, and they would say, I've given up my job again for Shabbat. And they would smile. And that generation, their children would see that keeping Shabbat is precious, it's a mitzvah, it's wonderful, it's special. In other words, there's a big difference in attitude, how a person presents the issue. There's no guarantees. Nothing will guarantee anything, and nothing will say, because you do it this way, that's going to be the consequence. Of course not. But ultimately, Rav Moshe writes this, that there was a big difference in attitude is a big deal. Attitude is a big deal. There has to be a positivity about keeping mitzvah. It's a wonderful thing. It's a special thing. It's not that it's so difficult. And therefore, he says, V'zehu atam. V'zehu atam, last 3 lines, Sha'amu Rachel v'Leah, she'im b'zeh shum nisayon. That's what they meant when they said, hey, we've got nothing in it for us anyway, let's go back. No test here. They were saying it's very easy to leave here and it's an easy mitzvah. And so too it is with all mitzvah. They were trying to transfer an idea to their families and to their children. This was an incredibly precious teaching moment. They had lived all their lives in this place. They had stood to gain in all sorts of things as a result of being the inheritors of Lavan. And instead they have to give it all up because they're going to go with Yaakov back to a land they've never seen before. They could say, this is really hard. This is really difficult. But Hashem has commanded it and we will listen. They could have said it like that. They didn't. They said, of course we're going to do it. They smiled. They said, there's nothing for us here. It's all about fulfilling what is the right thing to do, what is the mitzvah. And that, I think, is a very special observation. And the message, again, is in the third point that we said from the Seforno, which was that its external pressures cause us often to do the wrong thing. And the answer and the response is, the challenge is to be able to see difficult external pressures that we face. It might be challenges in making a living, it might be all sorts of things. But if they're induced through keeping the Torah, the challenge is not to see them as a sacrifice, but to see them as ultimately only a gain. If the challenges that we face because of our faith, right, help us and intentionally allow us and enable us to keep and to do the right thing, we ultimately know that we will be able to gain. And therefore Yaakov's experience in exile mirrors all of these three different factors that the Seforno points out to us at the beginning. The anti-Semitic oppression that we said Lavan does, Rimi Soni, you deceive me, you make me undermine my own values. Number two, the idea of being in a place where we feel personally there is nowhere to break out of. We cannot see a path forward. That is Rachel. And that is personal, that personal internal sense of pain. And finally, external factors like the poverty and the idea that we saw with the case of when they have to leave everything behind in order to go back to the land of Israel. The final point with this we finish, when Yaakov returns. So, let's look at the Psukim in time, inside. He comes back, chapter 32, verse 3. It says, we'll go back a few, it says, Yaakov gets up in the morning, they split, they make the pact between them. Yaakov goes on his way, right at the end of the parasha, and the angels of God encounter him. Vayoma Yaakov, and Yaakov says, Ka'asher Ra'am, when he sees, Machanei Elokim zeh. What does he exclaim? This is a camp of God. Vayikra Shem HaMakom Ahu Machanayim. And he says, he calls the name of the place Machanayim. Yes, from there comes the game. Machanayim, the two camps, right? Right? Shem HaMakom Machanayim, the two camps. What does it mean? What is going on in this pasuk? I'll show you first an amazing Targum Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud. Vayamar Yaakov, it's in Aramaic, source 8. Yaakov said, Chama Yosef, when he saw them, Dilma Mashirion min Lavan Achoy De'imoinun, Asan Kadomayla, Mr. Lekivli, Sidrei Krova, Lamiktal Yossi. He says, maybe this camp are people trying to attack me. Maybe this is from Lavan. Maybe these are marauding bandits that Lavan is now sent to outwit me and to destroy me. From Lavan, my father's brother. Oh, Dilma, or perhaps Mashir and the Malachim Kadishin. Maybe they are camps of holy angels, min Kadam Hashem, and from Hashem. Va'asyan l'sheizova Yossi, they've come to save me, min Yadein, from their hand, begin Kedein Korosh Meid Asru Machanayim. That's why he called it two camps. Because he was uncertain to the very end whether he had made it out in safety. When he sees this camp of people, he doesn't know it's angels, he's not sure. He says, maybe this is Lavan. Now he's going to get me, right? We made a pact, he's going to outwit me, he's gone ahead, he's sent bandits, and now they've come to attack me. And he's not sure. So he remains unsure to the very end. The lingering doubt, the uncertainty is there till the very end. It is not a fairy tale answer, it's not a fairy tale ending. He's come back to the land of Israel, but he's so afraid still. He doesn't know that Lavan's going to keep the pact. The Lavan's not going to come and attack him. And he calls it two camps. And what does he say? When he sees the place, it says, Kasher al Machanei Elokim zeh. When he sees them, he says, Machanei Elokim zeh. What is Machanei Elokim zeh? What is this camp of angels? Rashi seems to understand, and others as well, that the camp of angels are the angels that he sees descending and ascending. You know, the ones he was accompanied, we said it's a different set of angels. Those who accompanied him outside the land of Israel, and then other group are now coming to bring him back in. The Sforno says something differently. Last line. Hamachane shali shepagu bo malachei Elokim. This my camp, which has encountered the angels of God, because by now he realizes it is angels of God, ein sofek shemachane Elokim. It is no question that my camp is a camp of God. As it says, Hashem revealed himself to him. By having this revelation and realizing it was actually angels, he is able to turn around, not to the angels and say, this is the angels of God, this is the camp of God. He can turn around to his own family and say, this is a camp of God. The beautiful explanation of the Seforno and others' commentaries learn like this as well. The Yaakov's exclamation, Machanei Elokim zeh, this is the camp of God, is not about the angels. It's about himself and his family. You understand? Yaakov says, I now realize, because angels have come to greet me, I now realize what I've achieved. I now realize what we have achieved. That we've been able to survive that long and dark and difficult journey through exile. He has gone into a place alone. And he came out with the things he wished to keep strong. The things he wished to maintain while he was in exile. He maintains his faith, his belief, his emunah. He is able to support his family against all the odds. And above all, he's built a family. He's built a family. And he sees now that it is a Machaneh Elokim, it is a family, it is a camp of God. And that is something which is such a precious and inspirational insight. Vayeitzei is a journey. It is a journey. Vayeitzei Yaakov. Yaakov goes out. It is a journey of exile, which we have replicated as a people, but ultimately is a journey of return as well, of being able to maintain the values that we stand for. Wish you all Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. Okay, if we have enough